I never thought I'd be the catalyst for a federal investigation that would dismantle an entire police department. I'm a history professor. I live in books and lecture halls, in the quiet, dusty archives of the past. My life is about understanding conflict, not starting it. But on a cold Tuesday in October, Officer Kincaid brought the war to my doorstep, and he had no idea who my son was. He looked at me that day like I was something he'd scrape off the bottom of his shoe. Just another piece of urban decay that had drifted into his pristine suburban neighborhood. He didn't see Dr. Alana Matthews, holder of a PhD in military history from Howard University. He didn't see a widow who had raised 2 sons on her own after her husband, a decorated soldier, came home from Iraq in a flag-draped coffin. He just saw a black woman and her 10-year-old son, and in his world, that was enough to declare them guilty. Hours later, standing in the office of the chief of police, Kincaid would see me again. But this time, he wouldn't see a victim. He would see the mother of his new commanding officer. He would see the woman who had just ended his career with a single phone call. He had thrown hot coffee on me in a crowded cafe, called my beautiful, brilliant son a thug in training. And now, he was standing at rigid attention, sweating through his dress uniform, as that same thug's face stared down at him from the official portrait of 4-star General Jackson Matthews, the youngest commander in the history of the U.S. Strategic Command. He had picked a fight with the wrong mother. He just didn't know it yet. My life has been a study in quiet resilience. After my husband, Sergeant Marcus Matthews, was killed by an IED outside Fallujah, I was left with a grief so vast it felt like a country of its own, and 2 sons to raise within its borders. Jackson, my eldest, was 12, and the gravity of his father's uniform settled on his small shoulders overnight. He went from a boy who played with toy soldiers to a young man who studied military strategy. My youngest, Leo, was just a baby, a bundle of life in the midst of death. I poured everything I had into them. I finished my doctorate, juggling dissertations and diapers, grading papers while rocking a colicky baby to sleep. I taught them my husband's values, integrity, discipline, and the quiet strength that comes not from raising your voice, but from raising your standards. Jackson found his path in the military, a calling that was both a tribute to his father and a manifestation of his own incredible spirit. He rose through the ranks with a speed that was nothing short of meteoric. West Point, Ranger School, command positions that seasoned colonels coveted. By 34, he was General Jackson Jax Matthews, a name whispered with reverence in the halls of the Pentagon. He was my pride, my heart. But his success came with a constant, low-grade hum of anxiety. The world he moved in was dangerous, and I had already given one man I loved to the service of this country. While Jax was leading soldiers and advising presidents, I was navigating a different kind of battlefield, raising a young black boy in a world that often sees him as a threat before it sees him as a child. Leo was everything beautiful in the world. He had his father's smile and my curiosity, a heart full of wonder and a mind that asked 1,000,000 questions a day. My mission was to protect that light in him, to build a world for him where he could be curious and joyful and free, even if it was just within the walls of our small 2-bedroom apartment. I worked as a professor at the local university, a job I loved, but one that didn't pay enough to afford the kind of neighborhood where Leo could walk down the street without suspicion. We lived on the edge of the city, in a community that was rich in culture, but poor in resources. So, on weekends, I would take him to the nicer suburbs, to the sprawling parks with manicured lawns and state-of-the-art playgrounds. I wanted him to see that world, to know that it was his to inherit too. That's where we first met Officer Kincaid. It was a perfect autumn afternoon at Northwood Park. The air was crisp, and the leaves were a riot of red and gold. Leo was running, laughing, a vibrant splash of joy against the serene backdrop, his favorite Captain America action figure held high. Kincaid's patrol car rolled up slowly, a predator assessing its territory. He watched us for a long time, his eyes hidden behind reflective sunglasses. I felt the familiar prickle of being observed, of being out of place. I pulled Leo a little closer. Kincaid got out of his car, his movements slow and deliberate. He was a big man, thick-necked and barrel-chested. The kind of man who used his physical presence as a form of intimidation before he ever spoke a word. "Afternoon," he said, the word clipped. "This your kid?" "Yes, officer." "Is there a problem?" I kept my voice even, polite. The voice of a law-abiding citizen with nothing to hide. "We've had some reports," he said vaguely, "of suspicious activity in the park. People who don't belong here." He looked from me to Leo, then back again. The implication was clear. I saw the calculation in his eyes. My worn jeans, my 10-year-old car parked by the curb, the color of my skin. It all added up to a verdict he'd reached long before he'd opened his mouth. Leo, oblivious, swooped his Captain America through the air. "I'm saving the world, Mom," he yelled. Kincaid's eyes narrowed on the toy. "What's that he's got in his hand?" he demanded. "It's a toy, officer. An action figure." I held my breath. I had seen the videos, read the stories of boys like my son, of men like my husband, whose toys were mistaken for weapons with tragic consequences. "Let me see it," Kincaid said, reaching for it. Leo, startled, pulled it back. "No, he's mine." Kincaid's face hardened. "You learn to do what you're told, boy." He snatched the toy from Leo's hand, turning it over, examining it as if it were a piece of evidence from a crime scene. It was a 12-inch piece of plastic, painted red, white, and blue. "Just a toy," he grunted, tossing it onto the grass. Leo's face crumpled and he started to cry. "There's no reason to be so rough, officer," I said, my voice trembling slightly. "He's just a child." Kincaid smirked. "Got to learn respect for authority sometime. You folks should probably head back to your own neighborhood. This park is for the residents." He got back in his car and drove away, leaving us in a cloud of dust and humiliation. I hugged my sobbing son, my heart a cold, hard knot in my chest. I told him the policeman was just having a bad day. I told him it wasn't his fault. I lied, because the truth was too heavy for a 10-year-old to carry. The truth was that to a man like Officer Kincaid, my son's joy was suspicious. His existence was a crime, and his skin color was probable cause. That was the first time. The second time would be much, much worse. The week after the park incident was a blur of lectures on the Civil War, grading midterms, and trying to reassure Leo that the world was still a safe place. I didn't tell Jax about it. What would be the point? He had enough to worry about without adding the weight of a racist cop in his mother's neighborhood to his burdens. He was commanding thousands of troops, managing billion-dollar assets, and making decisions that affected global security. A playground bully with a badge seemed trivial in comparison. Besides, I believed in the system. I was a historian. I knew that progress was slow, often painful, but that the arc of the moral universe, as King said, bent toward justice. I would file a complaint. I would follow the procedure. I would trust the process. The coffee shop confrontation happened the following Tuesday. It was our little ritual, a stop at the Daily Grind for a hot chocolate for Leo and a latte for me after his weekly tutoring session. It was in a strip mall that bordered our neighborhood and the more affluent suburbs, a sort of neutral territory. Or so I thought. We were standing in line when Officer Kincaid walked in. He was off duty, dressed in jeans and a tight-fitting polo shirt that strained against his biceps, but he carried himself with the same arrogant authority. He saw us, and a flicker of recognition, of contempt, crossed his face. He got in line behind us. I could feel his presence, a heavy, oppressive weight. Leo clutched my hand, suddenly quiet. When we got to the counter, I pulled out a coupon from my wallet, a 2-for-1 deal I'd clipped from the local paper. Every dollar counted. As I handed it to the young barista, Kincaid spoke from behind me, his voice loud enough for the whole shop to hear. "You've got to be kidding me. People like you using coupons." The barista, a college kid with piercings and dyed blue hair, looked flustered. "Sir, it's a valid coupon." "Probably fake," Kincaid said, stepping forward to peer at it. "They're always running some kind of scam." My face burned with humiliation. The other patrons, mostly white, Upper middle-class women and a few businessmen on laptops looked up from their drinks, their faces a mixture of curiosity and discomfort. "Officer, it's a legitimate coupon from the newspaper," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "Oh, you know I'm an officer now," he sneered. "Last week in the park, I was just some guy ruining your kid's fun." He turned to the barista. "You need to check her ID. Make sure she's not using a stolen credit card to pay the difference." "Sir, that's really not necessary," the barista stammered. "It's $1.50. But the damage was done. Everyone was staring. Leo had buried his face in my coat. I just wanted to disappear, to melt into the floor. I fumbled in my purse for cash, my hands shaking. "Forget the coupon," I said. "Here's $5. Please, just give us our drinks." As the barista handed me the 2 cups, Kincaid deliberately bumped into me. It wasn't an accident. It was a calculated act of aggression. The hot coffee, my latte, sloshed over my hand and down the front of my coat. The pain was sharp, but the shame was sharper. "Watch where you're going," Kincaid snarled, as if it were my fault. My coat, a simple wool coat I'd saved for months to buy, was ruined. My hand was scalded. But worst of all was the look on my son's face. He was looking at me, then at Kincaid, his 10-year-old mind trying to process a world where a grown man, a police officer, would deliberately hurt his mother for no reason at all. He wasn't crying this time. His expression was something far worse. It was fear, yes, but it was mixed with a dawning, terrible understanding. "You all right, lady?" the barista asked, handing me a wad of napkins. Someone in the corner was filming on their phone. Another woman was whispering to her friend, shaking her head. But no one said anything to Kincaid. No one stood up for me. In their eyes, I was just a problem, a disruption to their quiet afternoon coffee break. Kincaid laughed, a short, ugly bark. "Guess you'll have to get that coat dry cleaned, if you can afford it." He then turned to Leo. "And you," he said, pointing a thick finger at my son. "You keep your mouth shut. Don't want to grow up to be a little thug, do you?" He paid for his coffee and walked out, leaving me standing in a puddle of coffee and humiliation. I took Leo's hand and walked out of the shop, leaving the hot chocolate on the counter. The point of no return had been crossed. This was no longer about a rude cop or a bad day. This was about a man who used his badge as a weapon to terrorize and humiliate people he deemed beneath him. This was about my son learning to be afraid in his own skin. I had tried to de-escalate. I had tried to be polite. I had tried to walk away. But Kincaid had followed me, cornered me, and assaulted me in public. He had forced me to make a choice. And as I drove home, my scalded hand throbbing and my son sitting in terrified silence beside me, I made it. I was a historian. I knew that the only way to deal with a bully, whether it was a playground tyrant or a totalitarian regime, was to confront them with a truth so powerful it could not be ignored. I was going to build a case against Officer Kincaid, piece by piece, fact by documented fact. And I was going to use the most powerful weapon in my arsenal. Not a gun, not a lawyer, but my mind. Kincaid had underestimated me. He saw a poor, powerless black woman. He had no idea he was picking a fight with a scholar who knew exactly how to dismantle men like him, using nothing but research, evidence, and the unassailable power of the truth. My apartment transformed from a home into a war room. The dining table, usually covered in Leo's homework and my ungraded papers, became my command center. I started with what I knew, research. For the next 2 weeks, I lived in a world of public records, legal databases, and online forums. I filed Freedom of Information Act requests with the city, the police department, and the county clerk's office. I requested Officer Derek Kincaid's complete, unredacted personnel file, every commendation, every complaint, every use of force report. The initial response was a wall of bureaucratic resistance. My requests were delayed, then denied, citing privacy concerns and ongoing investigations. They were protecting him. It was exactly what I expected. But I was a historian. I knew there was always a back door into the archives. I started digging into city council meeting minutes, budget reports, and legal settlements. The city had paid out over $1.2 million in police misconduct settlements in the last 5 years. I cross-referenced the case numbers with news reports and found a pattern. 3 of those settlements, totaling nearly $300,000, stemmed from lawsuits in which the arresting officer was Kincaid. The details were sickeningly familiar. A black man pulled over for a broken taillight that miraculously worked fine on the impound lot, but not before he was dragged from his car and roughed up. A Latina woman accused of shoplifting, held for hours, and strip-searched before security footage proved she'd done nothing wrong. A young black teenager arrested for loitering on his own front porch. In every case, the official reports were sanitized, the victims' claims dismissed as baseless, but the city still paid to make them go away. The system wasn't broken. It was working exactly as designed, protecting its own and pricing out justice for its victims. My research became an obsession. I created a timeline, a detailed chronology of Kincaid's career of terror. I found 37 formal complaints filed against him over his 12-year career. 37. The city's internal affairs department had sustained exactly 0 of them. The complaints were a chorus of unheard voices. Officer Kincaid called me a ghetto rat. He slammed my son against the hood of his car for looking at him wrong. He told my daughter she was dressed like a whore and deserved whatever she got. I reached out to the woman who had recorded the coffee shop incident. Her name was Sarah, a student at my university. She sent me the video, a crystal-clear 47-second clip of Kincaid's abuse. The audio was perfect. You could hear him call Leo a thug. You could hear his sneering comments about my coat. You could hear the shock in the voices of the other patrons. It was irrefutable. I filed my own formal complaint, submitting the video as evidence. I described the incident in the park and the confrontation in the coffee shop in precise academic detail, citing the specific city ordinances and departmental policies Kincaid had violated. I received a form letter in the mail 10 days later. The department has conducted a preliminary review of your complaint against Officer Kincaid. At this time, we have found insufficient evidence to proceed with a formal investigation. The matter is now closed. It was a slap in the face. They hadn't even bothered to interview me. They hadn't spoken to Sarah. They had watched a video of one of their officers assaulting a civilian and had decided it was insufficient evidence. That's when I understood. This wasn't just about one bad cop. It was about a system, a culture, a blue wall of silence that was impenetrable from the outside. Kincaid wasn't an anomaly. He was a symptom of a disease. And he knew it. He felt untouchable. I saw him a week later, patrolling a street near my apartment complex. He saw me too. He slowed his car, rolled down the window, and gave me a slow, smug smile. It was a message. I run this city. You are nothing. I went home that night, and for the first time, I felt a flicker of despair. How could I fight a system that was so thoroughly corrupt, so insulated from accountability? I looked at my son, sleeping peacefully in his bed, and the despair hardened into resolve. I had tried the system. I had followed the rules. Now, it was time to call in a higher authority. I picked up the phone and dialed the one number I had sworn I would only use in a true emergency. It rang once on a secure satellite line halfway around the world. "Mom?" Jax's voice was clear, alert, even at what must have been 3 a.m. his time. "Is everything okay?" "No, baby," I said, my voice finally breaking. "It's not. I need your help." I spent the next hour telling him everything. The park, the coffee shop, the complaints, the dismissals, the smug smile from the patrol car. I sent him the video, the public records, the links to the news articles about the settlements. I laid out the entire case, my voice the calm, measured tone of a professor presenting a thesis. When I was finished, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. "Mom," Jax finally said, and his voice was different. It was the voice I heard on the news when he was being interviewed at the Pentagon. It was the voice of General Alana Matthews. "I need you to send me Officer Kincaid's full name and badge number, and the name of his police chief. "What are you going to do?" I asked, a tremor of fear and hope in my voice. "I'm going to make a phone call," he said, "and then I'm coming home." The trap was set. The bait had been taken. Officer Kincaid had picked a fight with a history professor, but he was about to find himself at war with a 4-star general of the United States Army. The next 48 hours were a masterclass in strategic operations, executed not on a battlefield, but in the quiet corridors of power. While I waited, a package arrived by federal courier. It contained a single high-end burner phone with a note. "Use this for all communications. Throw your old one away. Love, Jax." The message was clear. We were now operating under a different set of rules. On Thursday morning, I received a call on the new phone. It was an aide from Jax's office, a crisp professional woman named Major Davis. "Dr. Matthews, General Matthews has arranged a meeting for you at the Brookwood Police Department tomorrow at 1400 hours. The Chief of Police and Officer Kincaid will be present. The General will be joining you." "He's coming here?" "Yes, ma'am. He is en route from Germany now." I spent the rest of the day preparing, not as a victim, but as a scholar preparing for a presentation. I organized my research into a binder, complete with tabbed sections for Kincaid's complaint history, the settlement records, witness statements, and a frame-by-frame analysis of the coffee shop video. I felt a strange sense of calm. The historian in me was taking over, documenting the fall of a petty tyrant. When I arrived at the police station the next day, the atmosphere was thick with condescension. The desk sergeant looked me up and down, then made me wait for 20 minutes in a plastic chair that smelled of stale cigarettes. Finally, Chief Miller's assistant, a woman with a sour face and a tight bun, led me to his office. The office was exactly what you'd expect. Dark wood, framed photos of the chief with local politicians, a faint smell of cigar smoke. Chief Miller was a man in his late 50s, with a soft belly, and the hard eyes of a man who had been dealing with what he considered the city's refuse for 30 years. Officer Kincaid was already there, standing by the window, arms crossed, a smirk playing on his lips. He was in his full uniform, the polished badge and gun a deliberate display of power. "Dr. Matthews," Chief Miller began, not bothering to stand or offer a handshake. "I've reviewed your complaint. Again. And frankly, I don't see what the fuss is about." Officer Kincaid was maintaining order. "You were creating a scene." "I was creating a scene?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. "Your officer assaulted me in public and terrorized my 10-year-old son." Miller waved a dismissive hand. "A little spilled coffee isn't assault, and kids need to learn to respect police officers. My officer's report says you were belligerent and uncooperative." Kincaid chimed in, his voice dripping with false sincerity. "I was concerned for the safety of the other patrons. She was acting erratically. I was just trying to de-escalate the situation." The lies were so blatant, so audacious, that for a moment I was speechless. They had their story, and they were sticking to it. They believed their version, the official version, was the only one that mattered. "And the video?" I asked, placing my binder on the edge of his desk. "Videos can be misleading," Miller grunted. "Edited, taken out of context." Just then, the door opened, and a man in a sharply tailored civilian suit walked in. He was tall, impeccably fit, with an air of quiet, coiled intensity. It was my son. "Chief Miller?" Jax said, his voice calm and level. "I'm Jackson Matthews. I'm here on behalf of my mother, Dr. Alana Matthews." Miller and Kincaid exchanged a look. This was not what they were expecting. They were used to dealing with public defenders and overworked community activists, not someone who looked like he could buy and sell the entire police department. "Mr. Matthews," Miller said, his tone shifting slightly. "This is an internal police matter. It became a federal matter the moment your officer violated my mother's civil rights," Jax replied, his eyes locking onto Kincaid. The smirk on Kincaid's face faltered. "Now I've reviewed your department's preliminary review," Jax continued, making air quotes with his fingers. "And I find it to be, to use a technical term, complete bullshit." Miller's face darkened. "You can't come in here and..." I can and I am, Jack said, cutting him off. You have a cancer in your department, Chief. His name is Officer Derek Kincaid. 37 complaints, $300,000 in settlements paid by the taxpayer, and a pattern of racially motivated harassment that is not just a disgrace to the badge, but a clear violation of 18 U.S. Code Parv 242. Kincaid took a step forward. Listen here. You don't know. The door opened again. This time, it was Major Davis, Jax's aide. She was in her full Army dress uniform, the decorations on her chest telling a story of service and distinction. She was carrying a garment bag. General, sir, she said, her voice crisp and formal. Your uniform, as requested. She unzipped the bag, revealing the deep blue jacket of the Army's dress uniform. The 4 silver stars on the shoulder glittered under the fluorescent lights. The silence in the room was absolute. Chief Miller's jaw had dropped. Kincaid looked like he'd been punched in the gut. He stared at the uniform, then at Jax, then at me, the pieces clicking into place in his head with an audible, shattering clang. Jax never broke eye contact with Kincaid as he took off his suit jacket and slipped on the uniform jacket. The transformation was instantaneous. The well-dressed civilian was gone. In his place stood General Jackson Matthews, commander of STRATCOM, a man who answered only to the Secretary of Defense and the President of the United States. Officer Kincaid, Jax said, his voice now carrying the unmistakable weight of command. I believe you've met my mother. Now, I suggest you stand at attention when a superior officer is addressing you. Kincaid, through years of ingrained instinct he probably didn't even know he had, snapped to a clumsy, terrified version of attention. Chief Miller looked like he was about to have a heart attack. General, sir, he stammered. We had no idea. That's the problem, Chief, Jack said, his voice cold as ice. You had no idea. You didn't investigate. You didn't listen. You didn't do your job. So now, I'm going to do it for you. He turned to me. Mom, would you please present your findings? I opened my binder. The reckoning had begun. The atmosphere in Chief Miller's office had undergone a chemical change. The air, once thick with arrogance, was now thin with fear. Kincaid stood ramrod straight, his eyes fixed on a point on the wall behind Jax's head, sweat beading on his upper lip. Chief Miller had sunk into his leather chair, his face the color of old parchment. Dr. Matthews, Jack said, his voice a calm, steady anchor in the swirling vortex of their panic. If you would. I stood and opened my binder on the chief's desk, turning it to face him. The first page was a high-resolution, time-stamped still from the coffee shop video, showing Kincaid's hand making contact with my arm, the coffee arcing through the air. At 14:32 on Tuesday, October 12th, I began, my voice the dispassionate tone of a lecturer. Officer Kincaid initiated unsolicited physical contact, resulting in a first-degree burn to my right hand and the deliberate destruction of personal property. I turned the page. This was preceded by a 94-second verbal confrontation in which Officer Kincaid used harassing and discriminatory language, including the unfounded accusation of fraud, and referring to my 10-year-old son as a thug in training. All of this, I tapped the page, is documented on video. Major Davis, standing by the door, handed a tablet to Chief Miller. The full, unedited video file, sir, along with audio enhancements conducted by Army intelligence analysts. Miller fumbled with the tablet, his hands shaking. Jax's gaze never left Kincaid. We move now to pattern and practice, I continued, flipping to the next section of my binder. Officer Kincaid, in your 12 years with this department, you have been the subject of 37 formal citizen complaints. 33 of those complaints were filed by people of color, a statistical disparity of 480% relative to the demographics of your patrol area. Jax interjected, My analysts have run the numbers, Chief. The probability of that disparity occurring by chance is less than 0.1%. This isn't a pattern of behavior, it's a mission statement. I laid out the settlement records. The city has paid $287,450 to settle 3 civil rights lawsuits in which you were the primary defendant. In each case, the internal affairs investigation found you acted within departmental guidelines. Yet, the city paid. That suggests the city's legal department knew your actions were indefensible, but the police department refused to implement corrective action. Miller looked like he wanted to be anywhere else on earth. "Those were nuisance suits," he mumbled. "The city attorney advised settling to avoid costly litigation." "Costly for whom, Chief?" I asked. "Because the cost to the victims was their dignity, their safety, and their faith in law enforcement. The cost to the taxpayer was nearly $300,000 to protect one rogue officer." Jax stepped forward, his presence filling the room. "Let's talk about your official report on this incident, Officer Kincaid." Major Davis handed Kincaid a copy of his own report. "You stated, and I quote, 'The subject became verbally abusive and created a public disturbance. I attempted to de-escalate, at which point she stumbled, spilling her beverage on herself." Kincaid stared at the paper, his own lies staring back at him. "Is that your sworn statement, officer?" Jax asked. "Yes, sir," Kincaid whispered. "Major," Jax said without turning. "Play the audio from the witness interviews." Major Davis tapped another tablet. The voice of the young barista filled the room. "No, she wasn't abusive at all. She was super polite. The officer was the one being aggressive from the start. He bumped into her, on purpose. I saw the whole thing." The next voice was Sarah, the student who recorded the video. "He was bullying her. It was disgusting. He threw the coffee on her. There is no doubt in my mind it was deliberate." Jax let the silence hang in the air for a moment. "That, Officer Kincaid, is the sound of your perjury. A federal offense, I might add. Lying in an official police report during an incident that is now part of a federal civil rights inquiry." The door opened, and 2 more men entered. They were dressed in dark suits, their faces grim and professional. "Chief Miller," one of them said, flashing his credentials. "Special Agent Davies, FBI, Civil Rights Division. I believe you received our notification." Miller nodded mutely. His department was officially under federal investigation. "General Matthews," Davies said, nodding respectfully to Jax. "We're prepared to take the officer into custody." "Not yet, Agent Davies," Jax said. "I'm not finished." He turned back to Kincaid, whose face was now completely devoid of color. "You see, officer, my mother is a historian. She believes in evidence, and she has compiled a mountain of it. But I'm a soldier. I believe in overwhelming force. So, while my mother was building her case, my team was building ours." Major Davis handed a thick file to Agent Davies. "That," Jax said, "is the unredacted personnel file of Officer Derek Kincaid, including sealed juvenile records and testimony from 3 fellow officers who have agreed to testify against him in exchange for federal immunity." Kincaid looked as if he might collapse. "Officer Miller, Officer Rodriguez, and Sergeant Peterson," Jax read from his phone. "All of them have documented instances of you using racial slurs, falsifying reports, and planting evidence. They were afraid to come forward. But it's amazing what a little encouragement from a 4-star general's office can do." "But we didn't stop there," Jax said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous growl. "We ran a full financial and network analysis. You're a member of 2 online white supremacist groups. You've made monthly donations to the Sons of the Confederacy for the past 6 years. Your social media, even under pseudonyms, is a cesspool of racist, misogynistic, and anti-government rhetoric." Agent Davies looked at Kincaid with cold disgust. "Derek Kincaid," he said, stepping forward. "You are under arrest for violations of federal civil rights law, perjury, and conspiracy to obstruct justice." As the FBI agents put Kincaid in handcuffs, the same man who had laughed at my pain and terrorized my son began to weep. It wasn't the sound of remorse. It was the sound of a bully who had finally, after a lifetime of impunity, run into someone he couldn't intimidate. Chief Miller looked from the weeping Kincaid to Jax, who stood like a statue carved from granite. "General, what do you want from me?" he asked, his voice shaking. "What do I want?" Jax repeated slowly. I want your resignation. I want a public apology to my mother. And I want you to turn over every single file related to every complaint ever filed against this department, because the FBI is just getting started. Your entire department is now a federal crime scene." I looked at Kincaid, a broken, sobbing man being led away in handcuffs, and I felt nothing. No satisfaction, no pity, no joy. Just the quiet, grim finality of a historian closing a book on a particularly ugly chapter of the past. The battle was over. The war for justice was just beginning. The fallout was swift and brutal, a controlled demolition of a corrupt institution. Chief Miller's resignation was on the governor's desk by the end of the day. His public apology, read by his lawyer on the steps of City Hall, was a pathetic, legalistic statement that satisfied no one, but fulfilled the letter of Jax's demand. The real consequences were far more profound. The FBI's investigation, spearheaded by Agent Davies and powered by the evidence I had compiled and the resources Jax had deployed, was a thing of terrifying efficiency. They seized every computer, every file, every server from the Brookwood Police Department. A team of 40 agents descended on the city, setting up a field office in a rented commercial space downtown. A hotline was established for citizens to report misconduct, and in the first week, it received over 400 calls. The stories poured out, a torrent of suppressed pain and injustice. Decades of harassment, wrongful arrests, and brutalization, all at the hands of a department that had operated like a private army. Kincaid, facing a litany of federal charges that could put him in prison for the rest of his life, quickly turned on his colleagues. His testimony, given in exchange for a plea deal, implicated a dozen other officers, including 2 lieutenants and a captain, in a wide-ranging conspiracy to cover up misconduct, falsify reports, and systematically target minority communities. It turned out my experience wasn't an isolated incident. It was policy. The department had an unofficial point system, rewarding officers for stops and arrests in designated high-crime areas, which were, without exception, black and brown neighborhoods. The statistical analysis performed by Jax's team became the backbone of the Department of Justice's civil rights lawsuit against the city. The numbers were undeniable, painting a picture not of a few bad apples, but of a thoroughly rotten orchard. The city, facing a lawsuit that could bankrupt it, and a scandal that was now front-page news across the country, had no choice but to agree to a consent decree, a federally mandated overhaul of its entire police force. And the lead consultant appointed by the DOJ to help design the new training and oversight protocols was a certain history professor with a specialization in military ethics and civil rights. Me. I took a sabbatical from the university and threw myself into the work. I spent months with community leaders, with former victims, and even with some of the officers who hadn't been implicated, trying to build something new from the ashes of the old. We designed a new training curriculum from the ground up, focusing on de-escalation, implicit bias, and constitutional law. We established a civilian oversight board with real power to investigate complaints and discipline officers. We rewrote the use of force policy, creating a clear and unambiguous standard that prioritized the sanctity of human life. It was the hardest, most exhausting work of my life. But every time I felt overwhelmed, I would look at a picture of Leo, and I would remember why I was doing it. I was building a world where he would not have to be afraid. The personal victories were quieter, but no less profound. Sarah, the student who had filmed the incident, became a passionate activist, organizing Know Your Rights workshops on campus. The barista from the Daily Grind testified against Kincaid and was hailed as a local hero. The coffee shop itself became a hub for community organizing meetings. The city settled with me out of court. The amount was substantial, enough to pay for Leo's college education and set up a trust fund for his future. I used a portion of the money to establish a scholarship at the university for students pursuing careers in public interest law and civil rights advocacy. It was named the Sergeant Marcus Matthews Memorial Scholarship in honor of my husband. Kincaid was sentenced to 10 years in federal prison. The other officers he implicated received sentences ranging from 2 to 7 years. The department was gutted. 17 officers were fired, and another 8 resigned. The old guard was gone. Jax, for his part, used the incident as a catalyst for change within the military. He spearheaded a new program to help service members transitioning to civilian life understand their civil rights and how to navigate interactions with law enforcement. He used his platform to speak out about the unique challenges faced by Black men, whether in or out of uniform. "My father wore the uniform of this country," he said in a speech at the National Press Club. "I wear it. We served and serve with honor. But when we come home, the uniform we wear every day, the skin we were born in, too often marks us as targets. That has to change." The change in Brookwood was palpable. The new police chief, a Black woman recruited from Atlanta, was a reformer with a national reputation. The new officers, recruited from a diverse pool of candidates, walked their beats, knew the residents by name, and treated them with respect. It wasn't perfect. The scars of the past were deep. But it was a beginning. Leo started playing in Northwood Park again. He still carried his Captain America action figure, but he no longer flinched when a patrol car drove by. One afternoon, a young officer, a woman, stopped her car and got out. My heart seized for a moment, a reflexive spasm of fear, but she just smiled. "Hey, little man," she said to Leo. "Cool action figure. Is he one of the good guys?" "He's the best guy," Leo said, his voice full of a child's unwavering certainty. "He always protects people." The officer looked at me and nodded, a gesture of shared understanding. "That's our job too," she said. And for the first time in a long time, I believed it. The arc of the moral universe had bent, just a little, toward justice in our small corner of the world. And it had bent because we had pulled on it with all our might. 1 year later, I stood on the stage of the newly dedicated Brookwood Center for Community and Justice, the building that used to be the police station. The dark wood had been painted over in bright, welcoming colors. The holding cells had been converted into classrooms and a free legal aid clinic. The chief's old office was now a playroom for a community daycare. The official portrait of General Jackson Matthews hung in the lobby, a gift from the Pentagon, a permanent reminder of how this transformation began. But next to it hung another portrait, a beautiful oil painting of a smiling 10-year-old boy holding a Captain America action figure. The plaque beneath it read, "Leo Matthews, for reminding us that the measure of a community is how it treats its children." I was delivering the keynote address at the center's dedication ceremony. The audience was a tapestry of the new Brookwood, the new police chief, members of the Civilian Oversight Board, community activists, students from the Sergeant Marcus Matthews Memorial Scholarship, and families who, for the first time, felt safe in their own neighborhoods. Jax was there, sitting in the front row, his 4-star uniform a quiet testament to the power that had been wielded for good. He was on leave, spending more time at home, a subtle shift in his own priorities. He had come to understand that protecting the nation began with protecting the family and the community that raised you. "History," I said, my voice echoing in the transformed space, "is not a static thing. It is not something that happens to us. It is something we make, every day, with the choices we make. We can choose to accept the world as it is, or we can choose to build the world as it should be." I looked out at the sea of faces, at the hope and determination in their eyes. A year ago, in a coffee shop not far from here, a man tried to humiliate me, to make me feel small and powerless. He chose cruelty. He chose prejudice. But in doing so, he gave me a choice. I could accept the story he was trying to write for me, a story of victimhood and fear, or I could pick up the pen and write my own. The journey had not been easy. There was still resistance, still embers of the old hatred that occasionally flared up in online comments or muttered remarks. But the momentum had shifted. Justice was now the default setting in Brookwood, not the exception. The consent decree had become a model for the nation. Police departments from 3 different states had sent delegations to study our new training programs and community oversight model. My work as a consultant was now in high demand, and the university had granted me an endowed chair to create a new department. the Institute for Historical Justice and Reconciliation. The story of what happened in Brookwood became a legend, a modern-day fable about a mother's love, a son's power, and a community's courage. It was a story of a reversal so profound, so complete, that it felt like something out of a book. But it was real, and it was our story. We are all historians, I concluded, my eyes finding Leo in the crowd. He was sitting next to his big brother, no longer a frightened little boy, but a confident young man who knew his own worth. We are all writing the story of our time. Let us write a story of justice. Let us write a story of courage. Let us write a story where every child, no matter the color of their skin, can play in a park and feel safe, can dream of being a hero, and can grow up in a world that sees their light, not just their shadow. The applause was thunderous, a wave of sound that was not just for me, but for all of us, for the history we had made together. It was a story born of a moment of ugliness, but it had become a testament to the enduring beauty of the human spirit. If you're watching this, you are part of a story too. Every day, you witness small injustices, moments of bias, acts of cruelty, and you have a choice. You can turn away, or you can become a historian. You can document what you see. You can collect the evidence. You can speak the truth, even when your voice shakes. You never know who you have in your corner. You never know what power you hold. Thank you for watching Black Voices, where we believe in the power of the story to change the world. If you were inspired by this story, please subscribe and share, because the more we share these stories of justice, the more just our world will become.